All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa, and we're here to talk about a Valentine's classic.
I mean, as soon as we got into the habit of doing things thematically, I mean, this was like the first one we thought of, right? It's like when we get to February, we got to do My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, and this is actually one, not to give away too much, but this is one of my favorite slashers.
Okay.
And so when we started thinking about this, I was like, oh fuck, we're gonna do this, aren't we? And
yeah.
So I'm really excited for two reasons. One, I finally get to talk about this movie on the podcast, and two, I get to talk about it with you because you hadn't seen it before last night.
This was my first viewing. I had seen My Bloody Valentine 3D with Jensen Ackles. And because it was like, during the 3D movie craze, like, fuck yeah, horror movie. I got to see this one, right? And so so I went and saw it with no background as to the movie. And then it was one of those things where I had interest in seeing it. And then, we go back to the blockbuster thing all the time, right? Like you get an idea, but if you're not sitting there to look for it at that moment, it's not like you're just gonna run. It's not like Netflix is gonna be like, "Hey, did you want to watch My Bloody Valentine?" Because it's not there. Like nobody's actively streaming this. So it's just something that just kept slipping through the cracks. I just never remembered to watch it at a time when I was, ready to do so. But here we are now. I have now seen My Bloody Valentine,
and that makes me so happy. It makes me really, really happy because there are few things that I enjoy more than sharing the things that I love with the people that I love.
Aww.
So and that is what this season of love is all about, isn't it? Right? So when it comes to My Bloody Valentine, right, there's something really important to consider here, which is the year that it was released. And this is something that we've mentioned before, right? It was released in 1981, which may seem like a somewhat innocuous year. However, this is what is often referred to in the horror aficionado circles as the year of the slasher.
Yes.
Right. There is no lack of horror slashers released this year. You have Halloween 2, you have Friday the 13th Part 2, you have another one of my absolute favorites, The Prowler, was released this year.
And I always forget that The Prowler was 81. Like, even though it's one of those things, like you ever think back on a movie, and unless it's like recent and you think of it as a period piece, like you tend to just put it in like the year that it, like the movie was like set. So when I think back on The Prowler, I'm like, oh god, that was 81. But it's like in my head, I'm like, that was made in the 60s, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much of it that does take place in that time, and it's so important to the story, right? But it's like there's so many of these, right? I'm looking it up now. The Burning is another absolute classic. I think Maniac may have been released in 1981 as well. And so
I'm not seeing Maniac on this list that I'm on.
Maniac
right now,
may have been
the one I'm looking at specifically slashers. I mean, Maniac is a slasher, but yeah, I mean, you're right. This is like I've got a list pulled up here.
Bloody Birthday, Deadly Blessing,
Student Bodies. Oh my god,
Student Bodies is great.
Came out in 81.
Yeah. Eyes of the Stranger, The Fan. The Fan, what a great psychological thriller slasher. The Funhouse, Tobe Hooper's other classic, right?
Oh, Hell Night, which we've done on this show.
Hell Night, yeah. Happy Birthday to Me, the Chef's Kiss. What a great twist ending. It's somewhat long. It's often called the long slasher,
right?
So I mean, there's no lack of slashers released in 1981. This is the height of the slasher, right? So this is an interesting time to be coming out with a slasher, particularly because it's using some of those established tropes that we've gotten since the Halloweens and the Black Christmas, right? A couple years before Halloween, right? So it's using some of those tropes. However, it's also establishing tropes, and it's really easy to get lost in this is just what happens in a slasher. We got to see this through the eyes of someone who was watching this movie in 1981, right? So there's a couple of things as we get into this that I want to ask. First is, what does My Bloody Valentine represent for the genre, right? But also, how does it hold up? Like as a movie today, if you were to walk into a movie theater and watch this today, how does it hold up?
So that's essentially the experience I got with this being my first time here in 30 years later. A couple of things that are definite standouts. You don't got a group of high schoolers just looking to have a fun night on the town. It does end up boiling down to a group of young adults looking to have a fun night, but they did age them up a little bit. They've got full-time jobs. I mean, they're blue collar working men. I mean, they're literally down in the mines. Like that's the whole thing.
Real people with real problems.
Exactly. And so I liked that aspect of it, right? So often when you get these ones where they're teenagers, it's like it's always like the popular kids, except for like that one or two people, or like the rich kids, and that's how they've got these big houses and they're throwing these parties and stuff like this. It was cool to see it set up as just like they party, but it's because they work their lives are shit. Like they live in this tiny town, like they work in mines all day, so of course all they do is like talk about sex and drink because that's what they do. There's nothing. The
only thing they had to look forward to was this one dance, and it's canceled, and it's like, let's have a party instead.
And so it's interesting because as we get into it, there are certain things that I liked a lot. There were a couple of letdowns for me. Not many, but there were a couple of things where I was like, almost missed it by that much type thing. But honestly, as it holds up, it does kind of keep you right on the edge of trying to figure out who the killer is. Like there's a turning point where I was established. I was a solid like 98% sure of who the killer was at a certain point in the movie, but it does keep you on your toes with it. We talked in Scream, that twist of seeing Skeet Ulrich get killed and then finding out later that he is the killer. You watch this and you go, okay, that was just an evolution of this, right? That was taking the idea of killing off a character and then having him come back. This movie's 30 years old, so throw it all out there. But that idea of killing off a character just to be like, aha, I'm still here and I'm the killer, like that type of stuff, to see the seeds of it. I always do try, whenever we do one of these older movies, I try to take the 2021 part of my brain and set it to the side. And I do try to think about it like if I were younger and this were the newest thing, which can be very difficult to do. These movies, through no fault of their own, age themselves. For God's sakes, Hollis's mustache. Well, and while that shit is back right now, you want to talk about what would hold up today? Hollis's mustache right now, that dude would be a banger at the bars. Women would flock to that dude's mustache right now. Like that's big right now. So it's weird to go back and see these older and see that stuff coming back around. But it did a lot of things that were cool. There were some great scares, nothing that, really made me scream or jump out of my seat, but there were some good scares. It was innovative without being over the top. There was a lot to really like about this movie. I will admit, I was pleasantly surprised. Like when you look at that list of stuff that comes out in 81, and we love this stuff. I knew I was going to like it just because of when it came out, but I was pleasantly surprised at how good of a movie I actually ended up thinking it was.
Yeah, and I find that that's true with those movies that you always hear, like, oh, this was one of those like trendsetter movies, or this was a game changer movie. And although that term is often applied to Halloween and Friday the 13th, this is one of those that people often, put up there on those, like, hey, yeah, as far as the slasher goes, this is one of those that you need to watch. Whenever someone says you need to watch this, I always take that with a grain of salt, because how often does someone say, hey, you need to watch this, and then it ends up being The Godfather,
Right.
Or
just
The
that one time
Exorcist,
when I watched The Godfather.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
but how often does it end up living up to the hype?
I know exactly.
And I do feel that this kind of does that. And so I for that, I think that the movie, both as a time capsule, and looking at it as a product of the 80s, and something that is both using established tropes to sell a product that they know is going to sell at the time, right? Similar to how you watch the teen comedies of the late 90s or the early 2000s, and you're going to get something like American Pie, because they knew American Pie was going to sell.
Yeah, because American Pie. I mean, American Pie was the formula then.
Exactly, right. So, but at the same time, it's also one of those that's bucking trends and creating trends as it goes. And so in 82, in 83, in 84, as these movies continue to come out, they take this, what George Mihalka did in this movie, and use that to great effect.
And one of the things I've really enjoyed doing when it comes to really all the movies we do, but especially the older ones, I love going back and just typing in the movie title and doing a Google image search. And running across fan art is just always dope. I mean, I love fan art. But man, like when you go back and you look at the actual marketing promotion for this movie, it was so geniusly simplistic. I mean, if you're watching live right now, you can see on our background here. I mean, that's basically all it was. It was always just this dude in a gas mask and the title. Like, I can only imagine that in 81, when you went into this movie, all you knew you were in for was a slasher, and there was a guy in a gas mask. Like, you did, like, from going back and looking, I couldn't tell anywhere in, like, short, I didn't look up trailers, but just short of like in billing blocks and stuff like that, never talked about how, it was because he was in the mines or anything like that. So it was, they did such a good job with this, with the marketing of it too. And again, so often one of the things that we look at, when you're looking at tropes, the 70s and 80s, like what is going to be that defining feature that when somebody sees it, they're going to think of your killer, right? Freddy's hat and claw, Jason's machete and mask, Chucky's overalls. I mean, the gas mask is synonymous with this movie. Everything, even the fan art, it all always centers around the gas mask, which is it's a level of genius on par with the hockey mask for Jason. It's something that's not hard to find. It's something that you're not wholly unfamiliar with, but they took it and they completely renovated what the meaning of it was. I loved that.
And they used it to incredible effect. Not to kind of go in a direction that we're already going to go in later, but they used that the gas mask and the miner's outfit in a way where it made sense, where you could suspect anyone to be this killer, but also it created a really iconic look, like you were talking about Michael's mask or Jason's mask or Freddy's hat and claws. It created something iconic, something that now, years later, has achieved cult status, where when anything with the miner on it is released, it sells out almost immediately. I was it last year or 2 years ago? Scream Factory collaborates with NECA, the toy company, and they were releasing the like the new director's cut of My Bloody Valentine, and they released it along with the action figure of the miner, and it
Right.
sold out almost immediately.
Don't doubt it.
In fact, I wasn't able to get it. I had to wait for NECA to re-release it themselves without the Blu-ray. It was just the figure for me to be able to get it, and I just barely got in on it, you know. So it's one of these things that has become, I mean, it's definitely a cult film, but it's right on that edge where I think most people are aware of it. You know,
Yeah.
is it like Rocky Horror, where it is the ultimate cult film, where it has kind of transcended cult and now is somewhat mainstream, right? I mean, it got a remake, you know.
Yes.
How often does a movie receive a remake? There has to be some sort of bankability there. A studio has to believe that there's some money to be made there.
Well, and I mean, it's a name that's kind of, that's moved on beyond past that. Like, I don't know for a fact that they named themselves after the movie, but I mean, there's like an Irish British band named My Bloody Valentine. Like, just that phrase, ended up transcending the movies themselves. So, we've talked about things that kind of set it apart, and I talked for a second about the fact that what we get here is a group of not teenagers. What we have are they're out of school. It doesn't seem like they're that far out of school, but we've got some blue collar working guys, and they're the ones being traumatized by everything that's going on in this movie. So as you look at them being aged up from your typical slasher, does that help or hurt the movie when you look at that from an aspect of how the characters develop and the movie plays out?
I think it helps this story. I don't know that if you did that with, say, A Nightmare on Elm Street, it would work. And I don't know that if you did that with something like Halloween, it would work. But I think because of this movie and its story, it works spectacularly. Because what you end up getting is a story that I think is much more relatable, because most people that are going to see these movies are going to be not high school age, but out of high school, right? Because I mean, technically, you're not even allowed into the theater to see these movies until you're at least 17, right? Not that people don't sneak in, because I was going to the movie theater and watching these movies, all throughout high school.
Correct.
So, I think that you're actually hitting your target demographic, which is that 18 to 25. And I think it does a lot here for establishing a sense of believability, right? Because if this is going to take place in a mining town, you could go the route like the Prowler does, right? And make it, where it's going to be a high school dance, or and there's not much going on in the town, and so everything is about that dance. Or you can go this route and make it where it's like, these people do represent the town and they're average people,
right?
And I think it does a really good job of doing that. And the average person then can look at characters like Howard and like Hollis and TJ and see something of themselves in these characters. And you're right, I don't think they're that far removed from high school. We get the sense that when TJ graduated, he moved away.
Right.
And whatever it was he was trying to do out west, I assume California.
Yeah, I'm
right?
guessing it's a Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
And
he was kind of a hunky guy. He's got, the smoldering good looks, didn't work out for him. And then he moved back. And so he lost the girl. He lost what he had, and now he's come back with nothing. So to me, this makes these characters there's something for them to lose. Like they have real lives beyond homework and the SAT. It's like these are adult problems now that they have.
Yeah, it's not just about blowing off class. It's you've got to, yeah, you could go out and drink every night, but if you miss the next day, that could cost you your livelihood. It makes stakes outside of running away from a killer more real and something far more relatable. To your right, that group that's out of high school. I moved to Tuscaloosa when I was 18, and when I moved here, this is the smallest town that I'd ever lived in. And Tuscaloosa, by no means a big city. It's a lot bigger than it was when I moved here 20 years ago. But it's nowhere near a big city, but it's also not one of these, small dots on the map like this town was. And so, but I have had a variety of shitty jobs. I mean, I've been working basically like when I turned 16, my parents were like, cool, like, well, we can't buy you a car. You're welcome to use ours as long as you can put gas in it. To put gas in it, you need money. You better start working.
Right.
And so, I mean, I've worked plenty of shitty jobs, never to the level of manual labor of working in a mine, but I've worked at a Cold Stone Creamery, and that's basically the same fucking thing. And so it's, and I've also worked a lot of those jobs once I was in college, and you do make those decisions where it's like, I'm going to drink all night and I'm going to get up and go work my shitty job in the morning and hope that the two don't affect each other, because I need the shitty job so I can have the nights when I go out drinking.
Right.
And so it's interesting to see that aspect. And especially because when you watch those high school movies, for a reason, everybody is always playing 50% character and 50% stereotype. That's just how it is. Everything eventually becomes that. The real world eventually stopped being about 6 real people living together, and it just became 6 stereotypes that we found people that fit and we shoved them together. That I didn't get the feeling that any of these people were like a stereotypical, like that guy in town and that guy in town. Yeah, they had personalities, but it wasn't, and they were definitely different characters, but they never were like, oh, well, Axel was the high school quarterback or anything like that. They didn't fall back on that type of stuff. And that did make it far more relatable. It was very interesting, but also, if you're appealing to that demographic, you don't go out and make a movie with a bunch of guys in their late 30s. Yeah, you go guys fresh out of high school who are just kind of consigned to the fact that this is going to be their life. You're not going to find, in my experience, a group of guys in their mid 30s playing grab ass in the shower like these dudes did in the first scene. But if you're fresh out of high school, you still have the memories of doing that. Maybe you're still working out at a rec center and occasionally throwing soap at your friends, or just guy shower stuff. Ladies, just ask. Any guy will tell you. Anybody who's ever showered for an athletic, especially in high school, it's super gay. And that is and not in any sort of like using that word in a demeaning way. It's just like everybody's swinging their dick around, and it's really gay.
And making lots of bubbles as you fart.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah. But it's so they throw that in there, and it's so it's light and it's fun, and it's like, okay, yeah, they're working men, but they're they're still young enough that they know how to have a good time.
And we do see kind of like the reciprocal of that, because we see some of the older guys that have been working in the mine for a little while longer, and they're much more somber, right? Yes. And when TJ and what was his name? Axel, thank you. When TJ and Axel get into it in the mine and they're about to start fighting, the supervisor comes in. He's like, I'm not going to have any fighting in my mine. That's the sort of thing that you get from the guys that have been there for a little while. Right. Yeah. So, they're definitely they're adults in age. Right. But definitely not mentally. And so I think that gives it this sense where they can go the route where they're like, okay, hey, you high school kids that are coming to see these movies, even though, Tipper Gore doesn't want you to come see these movies. Right.
Thank you, D. Snyder, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
He ran his mouth.
Yeah, man, fucking awesome. Twisted Sister's the greatest. So, you guys, there's something here for you, but also those of you who are old enough to actually see this movie, who are working jobs to be able to pay to see these movies and not getting mommy and daddy's allowance. This is for you.
Yeah. And I did like, because when I first turned it on with nothing to expect, I did expect high school kids. So when I immediately, and then you get the shower scene and it's like, do they work in the mines in high school? But then they hit the bar and it's like, okay, no. All right, cool. Like, let's go with this. It also, well, and I guess, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but you're talking about the older guys. There's this idea of something that very real that happened. But so once you get so far removed from it, the next generation doesn't as much care. Like we're teachers, so we run into this constantly. I'm berated by like middle schoolers who refer to Blink-182 as classic rock, shit like that, right?
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, it happens. It happens. And so, you did end up, like you were saying, getting this really great, getting not only this idea of that they're not far removed, but seeing that we may be seeing the last great years of their lives, because you do get to see these older guys that have been working in the mines. And I guess one of them's a bartender now or whatever. and they just hate everything. Life is just miserable. And I have known people I work in a mining town where a lot of the dads of my students work in the mine, like they're Brookwood strip mines. And they work in these mines, and you do see, I mean, you can always tell when like I teach little kids. So I usually get them where their dads are like, if they're in the mines, they just started, the soul hasn't been sucked out of them yet. And then you have some sort of, then you have some sort of, like parent night where the pre-K is going to perform. And then there's always just like a handful of granddads who come in just still covered in soot, overalls, and just no fucks left to give, right? And so you got the full scope of that. So when we're talking about things that are on the line, not only their livelihood, but we are watching what are possibly the last great years of their lives as stakes. And so that really adds to the drama of the whole thing.
Absolutely. And so with that drama, right, comes the story, right? This leans really interestingly, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's still an early slasher, right? So it leans on the slashers that came before it, your Halloweens, your Black Christmases, things like that. But it also really leans into the giallo movies that influenced those early slashers, right? Kind of going back to basics here, because at heart, this is a murder mystery. Yeah. That's really what this is. It kind of envelops the classic murder mystery. Sort of I would even say that this isn't too far removed from a classic Agatha Christie story.
I was, and the exact same vein, I was going to say it's a long episode of Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah, it kind of is. This is very similar to like something like And Then There Were None. Where just one by one these people start dying. The miner also is part of that. Right. He and we started talking about this, a little bit, the use of the miner costume, right? Because the killer uses it as a costume, but really it's a uniform, right? All of this goes into this great murder mystery in the classic giallo style, right? So, how does the miner and the story, how does all that come together and work or not work? Is it effective? Was it scary for you? What were your thoughts?
So as a story, if you're watching this and you're unfamiliar, basically what we're presented with is there's a heart that shows up in a candy box. And we get the story of how 20 years ago, a bunch of guys died in a mine because their supervisors went off to this Valentine's dance. One survived. He went nuts. He killed those supervisors. He got committed. And so they stopped having this Valentine's dance. Well, now they're going to have one, and the killer's showing back up. So there's this great passing of the guard element of the story where, yeah, all of these kids, they make fun of the bartender for telling the story, which awesome. There are not enough bartenders that tell stories in rhyme anymore. I'm
really
throwing that
aren't.
out there. I would live at a bar if they had a bartender that like gave me a beer and I mean shit, spit a limerick at me. Give me something.
Absolutely.
I'll take a Jay-Z verse, but just let's have some fun with it. I mean, so this guy starts off with like a great rhyme and he tells this amazing story of the killer and what happened 20 years ago and is mocking the kids or not mocking the kids, he's getting onto the kids for mocking it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we end up with this really good story of a town's history. We've referenced this many times. That you can run away from a lot of things, but you can't run away from your past or your town's past. Especially what I say this absolutely lovingly. I have a ton of people, like I said, from small dots, but when you live in a shithole town, I mean, that's usually what they're referred to as. And they're the type of towns where you grow up, you never leave it. You're raised there. That's where you get your job, have your kids, you pass your job on to your kids and you die there. And so we get this great story of a town's history when you are in a town that small being as important as your personal history, more so important because your personal history is everyone's personal history. And that was the part of the story that kind of hit me the hardest, was this idea that if you live in a town like, oh, the sun's getting ice, that's what that noise is. If you live in one of these small dots, your personal history is irrelevant because you have the same history as everyone else and you're not going to outrun that. So that part of the story and that element is what drives this home so amazingly. The actual, the actual plot of the movie and what we're presented with is paced very well. We get some cool kills, we get some iconic characters, but I really think that when you boil this whole thing down to the end, when it is revealed, if you're still listening and you don't want us to spoil it, turn it off now. It is revealed that Axel is the killer. And we find out it's because when the original miner went on his terror spree, his dad was one of those supervisors that he killed and he witnessed it. And I guess as a little kid, he snapped and then just carried that with him until he was a young adult. And so that story is great. And I really enjoyed that. And so often the story of a movie can only serve, they all serve different purposes. But that ended up being a good story that got us from A to B. But I really think that when you boil it all down, this is the story of what it can be like to be from one of these small dots. And I really, really enjoyed that.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, man. This like working class, average Joe story isn't told often in the horror genre. You look at all the other horror movies that we have looked at here, right? And we see either commentary on the downtrodden or commentary on the elite. And very rarely do we see, the average person's horror, right? Their homes are usually either extravagant or falling apart. And, this goes all the way back to like the Universal monsters, right? Dracula's castle, Frankenstein's castle, right? And you go forward a little bit, right? And it's something like The Exorcist, right? Ellen Burstyn, I mean, she lives in Washington in this beautiful townhome, and that's kind of the way it goes until you get to like the flip side, right? You get something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This house is like falling apart, right? They're literally eating people
Right, exactly.
to stay alive, so you never really get like the average Joe, or rather you so rarely get the average Joe. So when you do, I think it's fantastic. The other thing that I really love about this, I mentioned it when we first started talking about this, is the very classic Agatha Christie style um, mystery thriller aspect of this. I think that there is really a very good job done of keeping the killer um, kind of ambiguous, because I remember the first time I watched, and I've seen this movie a couple times now, because I watch it every February for the last couple of years.
Fair.
I remember the very first time I saw this, and I was thinking, it's probably not Harry Warden, because they keep mentioning him so much. It can't possibly be Harry Warden, right? However, if you do the math in your head, right, if he was a young 20-something-year-old minor at the time that this accident happened, and 20 years have passed, that would put him sometime in his mid 40s, early to mid 40s, and that's still physically capable enough to do all these things, right? He wouldn't be like a 70 or 80-year-old man trying to do these things. So it does make an awful lot of sense that it could possibly be him. But then
look at our modern. I mean, we now have a series of Halloween movies where it's like, yeah, no, it's the same guy from 40 years ago.
Yeah. It's still him.
Yeah.
He's almost 80, but because he's evil incarnate, there it is, right?
Yeah. And one of the things I really there were some great elements of storytelling that go back to that small town everyday feel type thing. I loved, and this doesn't even seem like it was like a production choice or anything. It's just like where that was filmed. There was a store called like OK Ladies Wear. It's like I love a store like that. It's like, hey, you got any good dresses? All right.
Yeah, they're okay.
Yeah. And so I just that made me laugh. But one of my favorite moments in this that really drove home like the whole small town thing was this idea of like the girls getting so hyped and like moderately turned on by like blue collar things, right? Like, ooh,
Yeah.
you're gonna take us down in the mines. Oh, like yeah, it's just like a cart on a track that goes 2,000 feet down. Yes, please. Like that, like when there's that couple that are making out where they store their uniforms, and it makes her giddy that like she pulls this rope and their uniform drops down. Like little stuff like that it's so wholesome in a way, right? That you've got these girls that it doesn't take much to impress them because they haven't seen much. And so seeing like the underside of what they know their town to be, like that's a big deal to them. And so I really loved that element of it. I just, like I said, at first it was laughable to me that it was like an aphrodisiac to go down in the mine. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, I guess, if your dad and your uncles and now your boyfriend, they're all working there, it's kind of cool to get to see it.
That was exactly the point that I was going to make, is like my grandfather owned a frozen food distribution company for many, many years. And my uncle, my father, my mother, me, we all worked there. And I remember being a little kid, and like during the summer break or winter break, waking up really early to go to work with my parents, and like thinking, man, I get to go inside this freezer. Like, how cool is that? And then it's nothing, there's just racks with pallets all up in there with frozen produce. That's all it was. But for me, who hadn't seen much in life, it was like, oh man, this is where the magic happens. This is where you go every day, and then of course, as I got older, and I was in high school, and granted, I'm not calling myself a blue collar worker, never have been. All right. Their plight is not my plight. All right. I live a very cushy lifestyle, but when there was a rail car that needed to be unloaded, and we were, the clock was ticking, I'd be out there unloading that rail car with the rest of the guys. And so I know what it's like to finish work and be absolutely physically drained and be like, who's getting the beers?
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and that adds a sense of realism to this story, along with the fact that, I mean, this very possibly could happen. This isn't a Freddy Krueger who's, you know, killing you in your dreams. This isn't a Jason Voorhees that is supernaturally strong. This is just a crazy dude with a pickaxe. That's all this is.
Dope. I mean, just, you know, like if the entire story of this movie were created because of the idea of we want to make a slasher where the guy has a pickaxe, I'm here for it. Like it's like, you know, it always goes like, yes, Freddy Krueger's glove is impressive and it's cool. But man, when you look at something that you can just go to the hardware store and buy, and it becomes an iconic weapon of mass murder, that's so cool. Like, I can go to Walmart and buy a machete. You know, I can buy a pickaxe wherever. Like, it's just like, again, another element of how real it is. And it made sense for him to have a pickaxe.
And that, to me, that's part of the reason why those first few Friday the 13th movies work so well, is because all you have is Jason kind of limping from place to place as he gets more and more fucked up, right? Because he does finally die at the end of the fourth one, even if he comes back later, right?
Electricity does that.
Yeah, Frankenstein stuff. And actually, part 6 is my favorite. as I say that the first 4 work particularly well. And it's really just him like breaking into people's sheds and breaking into their houses and taking knives and machetes and pitchforks and shovels and you know, hedge clippers and just going to town on people with these very average everyday items, you know, and that's really scary to me. You know, one of my favorite movies ever, horror, action, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's favorite movies ever is Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing scene where he goes into the gardening shed of this gigantic house that he's storming, right? And he looks around and I was like, oh, buddy, he's about to go to town on all these guys. And sure enough, he comes out of there and he's throwing fucking circular saws. He's fucking pitchforking people, chopping off arms, you know, and that's the brutality of these instruments that we use in different ways every day, you know. So this pickaxe, which, you know, represents the heart and soul of this town, you know. Valentine Bluff lives off of this mine, you know, the Hanniger mine. For him to bastardize that into this thing that, you know, rips out your heart, that's to me, it's a really interesting symbolism, but it's also a really great way to make this real.
Oh my God, dude, I did not even make that connection. I love that. You're right. Like the tool that is the heart of the town, the reason that it exists, and he uses it to rip out people's hearts. God damn, I love that. So
it's almost like I do this for a living.
Hey, so there's also an element of this film and this story that is so perfect. And it's the fact that the killer is, you know, he leaves these little like poetic love notes.
Oh, it's so good.
And yes, if all you did was see it, they're so cheesy, right? But what is Valentine's Day? It's Hallmark packaging cheese and finding a way to make us sell it and finding a way to make us buy it. They sell it. They just make us buy it. And and so like if Michael Myers had written a note that said roses are red, violets are blue. One of them is dead, and so are you. You'd be like, that's fucking stupid. I hate you, and I hate this. But for it to be attached to this box of Valentine's candy is so good. It's so good. And like this idea of like the poetic killer. I know that they did not create it for this movie, but they took it to another level for this by watering it down and making it fit what they were doing. And I loved that so much. Like by the final, the act 3 killing spree, I found myself disappointed that he didn't have time to stop and make notes like every time. Like it's like, no, I wanted a hot dog pun for the guy whose face you just shoved in boiling water. I really wanted a wiener pun. Could have used it. But it's such a simple idea, executed brilliantly. And it just goes to show what you can do when you just take the time to make all the pieces fit. And
Absolutely.
I just adored that part of the movie. I thought that it was, I loved it so much. I couldn't, man, that, like I said, because just at a blush, it's like, oh, that was cheesy. And then it's like, wait, this whole thing's Valentine's Day. All right, here for it. Let's go. Bring on some more.
It works within the context of the movie, and it also gives him another bit of iconography, because it's not just the outfit, it's not just the pickaxe, it's the human heart inside the chocolate box. It's the notes that go along with it. That NECA figure I told you about that I got that I'm really excited about. It's back here behind me. It comes not just with the pickaxe, which you're like, oh yeah, it's got to come with the pickaxe, but it also comes with the heart in the box. That's how iconic this thing is. It's part of his character.
Yeah. So as we talk about the character of the miner and just everything that we're kind of looking at, when we look at all of these elements that make such a great story, we've got to look at the idea of how the film was made. We always get into this. There's a lot of elements here. But when we've mentioned the Prowler and Happy Birthday to Me and a lot of these really early things that were done with a super high level of proficiency. So when you're looking at My Bloody Valentine, kind of where does it fall on that spectrum of being a good movie, not just a good slasher?
So I think that when you look at a movie like Friday the 13th, which is incredibly influential, right? That's a really good slasher, but it's not a good movie.
Right.
Sean Cunningham is not a good director. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he should do, rather. But that doesn't make him a particularly good director. And I think, some of that has to do with the budget, but Paramount bought into this, he did have Paramount behind him when he was making this movie. And there were certain things that he just, he's not a good filmmaker. He's a great producer, and you can look at his producing credits and you're like, oh shit, yeah, Homeboy's done some real good stuff. John Carpenter's a different story, though. When you look at Halloween, that's a really well-made movie.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Halloween works so well all these years later. I think this movie has that. There's a quality to this movie that I would say 95% of slashers are missing, if not more than 95%. And that's technical know-how. George Mihalka went to film school, and it shows. He knows what kinds of shots do what. He knows how to edit film. There's a couple of really amazing shots in this movie where it's like, oh wow, that's really effective. When Mabel is trying to escape the miner, right? She's running through those curtains that go to the back of her laundromat, and as she runs through, you see just the hand of the miner grab her hair and pull her back in, and the shot is so beautiful. It's framed so perfectly, right? The shot of I can't remember her name, but the girl that gets killed in the shower, she's spinning around and the camera is spinning around her
as the clothes are dropping off the hooks.
Yes. And it's one of, I think, the most effective shots in any horror movie I've ever seen, because the disorientation that she's feeling, you're feeling, but you're also along with her for the ride because you're seeing it on her face at the same time. So the disorientation is given to you you as the viewer while you are watching her be disoriented. It's a genius little trick of the camera that he does, and it's stuff like that that elevates this movie from your run-of-the-mill slasher, which obviously in retrospect you look at this and it's not that different from anything else that came out in 1981, but there's all those little things that add up, right? It's like, game of inches sort of thing, right? And that's what it is. It's an inch here and it's an inch there, and the filmmaking aspect of it, where it is such a tight script and the cast was so well done, right? And it was just shot so perfectly. Everything was mapped out, and you can tell right from the beginning that this is going to be a different kind of film, because that opening scene where the miner hooks the woman onto,
yes,
I mean the way that that's shot, that's a sexy scene, and yet there's nothing gratuitous about it.
Right.
So it doesn't sink to that level of like softcore porn that you're getting in a lot of these movies, which, unfortunately this gets lumped in with a lot of the time. You look at the cars racing to the bar in the very next scene, right? As they're all getting off of work for the first time. And I got, at least I did, a lot of like George Miller vibes from the way it was shot with the work that he did with Mad Max. He knows that when you're shooting cars, one of the things you do to visually increase speed is to shoot low, and you get as close to the ground as possible so that as those cars come by, they're coming by fast and you're seeing those tires just spin. And so these are little things that he does that it's like, fuck, he really knows what he's doing. And as a casual viewer, I don't know why it does something to me, but I know that it makes me enjoy the movie more, right? It's like listening to like a remastered version of an album that was done with very little budget, right? All of a sudden it sounds better and you don't know why it sounds better,
right?
But there is something to it. You're like, oh, I prefer this version and I don't know why, right? It's the same thing here. There's the quality, although you can't necessarily put your finger on it, it's like, that's doing something for me.
Yeah. One of the things that really stood out to me when it comes to the filmmaking here, and just, I mean, boiling it all the way down, the writing and the dialogue all felt very natural, down to the fact that sometimes when it was stilted at the right times, right? Because we get this story of TJ and Axel, who were friends and were shown very early that they were close friends, but now they're in competition for the same girl. And so occasionally when they're having a conversation, you get this really weird back and forth, but it works in those moments because you're now suddenly at odds with somebody that you've been friends with. And that can be, the junkyard scene. Exactly. It's a really awkward thing. So it makes sense for that conversation to be stilted because you've known somebody for so long and you've always engaged with them in a certain way. Now that is turned completely upside down, how do you view this person who was once your friend as some sort of enemy? You're not familiar with how you're going to have those conversations. And so, and then the characters themselves, and I know we've talked a little bit about this, but they were all written not as stereotypes, but they did fill certain roles. And like I said, you only had this one really outlandish character. And honestly, was he that outlandish? Yeah, he wore like heart-shaped sunglasses and he had big teeth, but everybody knows a goofball. He wasn't a Stu level of goofball, like,
no.
But, I mean, Stu was perfect for what Scream was, but that guy was a perfect level of goofball, which really just kind of made him a normal guy because everybody else was down here.
Right.
There were some fun things, some little tropey things, but that I always get excited for. I pop for the first person point of view of a killer. I just always do. I always do. Like when we watch Slumber Party, I made sure to bring it up then. You watch a Halloween movie, which is probably where it all goes back to, Michael Myers through the mask and everything.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's such a little simple thing to do, but it's warm and it's fuzzy, like it feels right. It takes you, there's a moment in the film where it takes you out of wondering who the killer is, and now you're just like, oh, I'm gonna see this shit firsthand.
I'm along for
Like,
the
okay,
ride.
yeah. So little things like that just end up being so great, like you said, just a game of inches, but also the concept of not overusing it. They only did it the one time when he stalked Mabel in the laundromat. It did not come back around, because then for the rest of the movie, now we know, okay, this is a killer on the loose, and now we're in the role of trying to figure out who it is. So he was smart enough to not put us in the role of killer anymore once the movie had progressed to the point where we were now in the role of detective. And I thought that was very smart. I thought that was a genius move. It was just, it was just a little toss up to something that you love, but not overused. Musically, score and stuff like that was all pretty standard, but the song during the credits, the ballad of Harold, I've forgotten his name.
Harry Warden.
Harry Warden. There we go. The ballad of Harry Warden that plays during the credits that's
a great song.
Haunting. It's haunting, and it's amazingly good. Like, this wasn't I'm trained to sit through the credits, I'm gonna sit here. This wasn't I need a hard reset a la Hereditary. This was, man, I just want to hear this song. Like, I want, it was Bob Dylan and it was Neil Young. And I mean, it was just this great folk song. And I'm not a folk guy, but man, like in that moment, it was such a perfect song. It was just, it was a beautiful end to a movie that ended on a really weird. So back when we did Sleepaway Camp, we talked about this final shot of the frozen face screaming, screen goes green. So what they did with My Bloody Valentine was they go like one step further. And it's like, okay, here's the killer. Everybody's got him trapped. We're going to have him run away while like wailing and laughing incessantly as an insane person, drop the name of the movie, and then roll the credits. I was like, I mean, that ending was so good. And it was the perfect culmination of everything that this movie had done so well in just this one little scene, especially because he did it after a mine shaft was dropped on him. Like, he gets a mine shaft dropped on him. Then a group of the people from the town are excited he's alive, maybe so they could kill him, maybe just so they could figure out, who it was. And then just to laugh maniacally and run away into the darkness of an abandoned mine.
And saying that you and Harry Warden, who we know is dead, are going to come back. I mean, that's haunting, and I think that's what that song really does best, is that it is a great way to leave a lasting impression.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Harry. If the last thing you're hearing about when the credits roll is Harry Warden, then you're gonna think about him, and you sit there and you listen to the song, and it's like, man. But it was also that writing and directorial decision also gave you a lot of insight to the depths of Axel's psychosis, because Axel was presented as just a normal guy who was protective of his girl and some things like that, until it's revealed that he's the killer. And then you get this one little brief flashback, which also kudos. I do remember that scene when he killed that guy earlier in the movie. They did eventually spoon feed it to me and go, he was the supervisor's son. But in that moment, it was done very, very well. And so we get that, and it's like, oh, okay, that's why he's crazy. That still doesn't seem like murder a bunch of people 20 years crazy. And then it's like, oh no, the running into an abandoned mine shaft laughing, that seems like kill a bunch of people 20 years later crazy. So okay, I'm here.
and then you get hit with the song.
Yeah, it's just it was like
it's a perfect ending, man.
Yeah, it really was great.
And you know what's interesting, because you called it the last act, and it is the last act of the movie, but the last act of the movie is half the fucking movie.
Yeah, true enough.
That's a tense 45 minutes that we're getting.
Yes.
And it really never lets up. Like that build up to them having the party at the mine is really great. But once they get to the party, that's where basically like you're on the edge of your seat the whole time, and yet it's really not like a jump out and scare you movie. This isn't a movie with an awful lot of action, you know. It's a lot of talking.
Yeah,
This movie's a lot. It's a lot of talking. It's a lot of story, and yet it's all tension. It's all tension,
Yeah.
and it, the payoff is fantastic. There's
really is.
When you were talking about the Ballad of Harry Warden, it reminded me of there's another movie called Madman. I don't know if you've ever seen this one. Like The Burning, it is based on the legend of Cropsey.
Okay.
In New York. And it's one of those where it opens and closes with this like urban legend, you know, sort of ballad about the madman of the woods. And it's you don't see that very often. It was something that was done a lot back in like the 40s and the 50s, particularly with westerns. You'd hear, you know, you'd watch a lot of westerns, and they'd have, you know, whoever the big western star that year was, and he'd, you know, sing a ballad, you know, for that movie, and it would be the title of the movie would be in there, you know, where the town's sheriff would be in the name of the song. And somehow it's really effective, and it's not as cheesy as you might think it is.
Yeah, it worked, man. So as we look at this movie, what we have is we've got a killer, a town with a dark past, bunch of kids, young adults throwing a party. We've got all the elements here of an 80s slasher. And as we're looking at 80s slasher, we know where we've got to go, and we've got to talk boobs and blood.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean,
boobs and blood, man.
You know, boobs, there's almost nothing. In fact, the most you get is I think a poster in the background.
Yeah.
I've seen this movie enough to know that. Yeah, there's like some Playboy pinups in Hap's bar, and I think in the locker of the mine. That's it. None of the women get undressed. The closest thing you get is a bra. And I think you see more of the guys in the shower, which you don't see much, than you do of any of the women, and they're all gorgeous.
Yes.
All the women are gorgeous. These guys are reaching, and they are reaching far. But I mean, I kind of like that in a slasher where it's kind of restrained there, where I think a lot of times the sex is gratuitous. And I think this is one of those movies where, you know, like we were talking about before, where it's kind of using tropes because the tropes are not yet standard, but they kind of know what's going to work. And yet it's creating tropes as well. And it's kind of bucking trends at the same time. And this is one of those that I think it kind of put away, and it worked in its favor. The one area where I think that this movie suffers, and it's not the fault of the movie, but of the ratings association, is in the kills.
Yes.
Because we get such a sissified version of the kills.
Yes.
Like they are just totally edited. We see just before the kill, we see after the kill, and I have never, unfortunately, seen the director's cut, which adds in 3 whole minutes.
Oh, look at now.
That's a lot. You know, I mentioned Commando earlier. There's a director's cut of Commando that adds 30 seconds. 40 seconds, and those 30 or 40 seconds makes a big difference. I mean, there's a whole scene that's cut out, and there's a whole lot of blood and bullets that gets cut out with those 40 seconds. You know, I can't even begin to imagine how much better this movie is with 3 whole minutes of blood and gore.
Especially because it would, it would only take 10 to 15 seconds to show us more of the aftermath or during of some of these kills, which would have ramped everything up.
Yeah. So I do think that this is one of those areas where the movie actually does suffer. And I think that what we have is not bad. It's certainly not bad, and there's plenty of blood to go around. I mean, Mabel dies in an absolutely gruesome way, even though we don't get to see it. But the aftermath of that, and that's a really great tense scene where the sheriff is walking up and down and looking at all the different washers and dryers,
and there's just the sound of the one dryer going, just thump, and that's the only sound. Thump. Yes.
And if you look closely, I mean, when you've seen the movie enough times, you start to pick up on these things, right? When you look closely, the dryer that she's in, the glass is smeared in blood. So it's one of those things where maybe not the first time or even the second time you watch it, you notice it, but after a while you're like, oh, that's the one, that's where she is, and so like, I can only imagine how brutal that scene was, because it's not just that, her skin has been turned to beef jerky, right? But it's also that, like, she's been completely
splayed.
Yeah. I mean, it totally eviscerated. And there's other kills, like you mentioned the hot dogs, the boiling hot dogs. That's one where we got a very similar kill in Sleepaway Camp with the pot of boiling water where he was shucking the corn.
The 8-foot tall pot of water.
And I think, had we gotten something like that, because we see the aftermath of that when he's what was it, Dave, right? When he's in the refrigerator, right? That's a really awesome effect on his face. The prosthetic is great. And that's the thing, is that these effects seem to be like almost on a Tom Savini level good, right? They didn't get Savini, probably couldn't afford Savini, but it's almost on that level. And unfortunately, we didn't get that, because the movie was just butchered. And I mean, I've heard and read that if you do see the director's cut, it's almost like a completely different movie, that it's so much bloodier, so much gorier. It really does earn its name of My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely took like exactly what I was going to say. And that is what, back when we did the Candyman remake recently, we brought up this idea of, especially with the newer movies, it's far more expected because we know what you can get away with when you're making a movie. But yeah, it's like so many of the kills were just teased. What could have been really great, gruesome scenes without being absurd, we were taken right to the edge. The one that sticks out for me is the shower kill.
Absolutely.
I look, even if you're not going to show me him picking her up and impaling her head on the shower head, which, let's face it, that that's probably a very difficult effect, especially in 1981. Yeah. There was a moment there where they obviously had some sort of model of it, because we get this profile of the water shooting out of her mouth. And I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the head stuck on the shower head with the water shooting out of her mouth. And they didn't give it to me.
It's such a creative kill.
It is. It's so good. And honest, like I the only back at the top, I said it did have some misses, and we'll get to them. And it was when we were going to get to this point. And man, it's just like there's, like when he impales the woman on the pickaxe at the beginning, we do kind of see it come through. They didn't get crazy with it, with the blood spurting or anything. Probably could have used a little bit more, but they do show it. But like when the guy, by the way, the shower kill, awesome, could have been visually amazing. But there's something that's taken away from it by the fact that we don't get the visuals of during or after. There's a kill that we see very little of that I thought was insanely creative. And it's when the guy from the bar is trying to set up the prank with the dummy. So where when they open the door, it swings the pickaxe, and he's so enamored with his idea that he has to keep going back and checking on it so he can laugh about it. And then of course he goes back one too many times, and he opens the door, and the actual miner's there, and with the same motion that he set the dummy up to do, with the pickaxe coming up, swings up and guts the guy. That was the one where I was like, I'm totally okay with not seeing this whole thing, because the shock and comedic effect of this kill were so creative and so perfectly placed. That was one where I think that they absolutely hit all the marks. But on so many of the others, you're right. They could, like, just seeing the aftermath of Mabel being ripped open when they pull the Valentine out of her chest. We did get some of the gore there. But I want to know, it's like, I don't need to see him ripping her open, but it would have been nice to just get that one good pull. Just something more out of that than just seeing that he got her and then finding her in the dryer. That is my only knock on this movie. And I, if it was a ratings thing for 81, that makes sense. But I and like you said, I wasn't even disappointed at the lack of boobs. It starts off and it makes you think, hey, here come the boobs, you're in for it. And then they stop it, and you're like, okay, but it was really cool the way they did it. But I never found myself feeling like I was cheated out of seeing someone naked. That probably sounded horribly misogynistic, but you know what I mean. It's
it's an 80s slasher. You've come to expect it.
And like when we discussed Scream, we talked about how they purposefully cheated us out of seeing Neve Campbell topless, and that was the joke. I never felt like they even got me to that point where I expected to see someone naked after that first scene. And I was okay with that.
It was well established.
Yeah.
Because he goes to, feel her up, and he sees the heart tattoo, and he decides, no, I'm not here for the sex. I'm here to murder you.
That's
and what we were teased with was the kills, because then that's when he murders her, but we don't actually get to see most of these.
Yeah. Would I have been okay with seeing Cynthia Dale naked? Absolutely.
Oh man, what a smoke. And she is still gorgeous.
Yes. So, and all the scene where the goofy guy like falls down with the rope around his head, and then the weight of his own body decapitates him.
Oh,
beautifully done.
Yeah,
that is one really where they gave us every bit of it. And while it's awesome, it does also make you go, God, if they knew what they were doing so well, why didn't I get to see some of these others a little bit more? Yeah. And so that is honestly my only knock on it. Is I wanted, like I said, 3 minutes. 3 minutes might be the perfect amount of more film to where it didn't get over the top, but a little bit of that slasher bloodlust that I get, when I'm watching a movie is more then I'm watching one of these movies a little more satisfied.
Yeah. We actually have
Andy
here. Andy, nice. Glad you're joining us. Says Andy Chacon, a friend of the podcast, says, I've always liked this movie, but I think it doesn't know what it wants to be. It's a slasher. There's a shitload of drama. It's just not straightforward to me, but I still love it. And you know what? I don't think you're necessarily wrong. We were talking a little earlier about how it's very much like a murder mystery. And then there is that drama between Axel and TJ, that sort of love triangle between them and is it Lori? The
blonde one.
Yeah, Sarah. Lori's the name of the actress. Sorry about that.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough for.
Oh yeah. Lori Haller is Sarah Mercer. There it is.
Yeah. So this leaves us with our rating system. Now we never solidified this.
I didn't feel the need to. There's only one choice. Like I saw you wrote it, and it's what I was going to suggest. It's the only choice for this movie. It's so iconic they put it on your figure.
Yeah, exactly. So then, Daniel, out of a possible 5 human heart-filled chocolate boxes, how many human heart-filled chocolate boxes do you give this?
So, for all of the reasons that we've discussed, I loved this movie. I loved it. It satisfied the 80s horror movie fan in me. It satisfied the need for a scary movie to do more than just be a straightforward scary movie. The writing, the cinematography, all of that stuff was very, very well done. Uh, I am going to knock it one spot, one candy box, because I wanted a little bit more gore. I wanted to see some of these kills come to fruition. I'm willing to let it. I'm okay with it, but I think that what keeps it from reaching the apex of what it could be is that lack of gore. So I'm going to go with this sits at a solid 4 human heart-filled candy boxes, because I do think it's a very, very good movie. We always use that. This is one I would recommend to anybody. You can recommend this one to a group of friends who want to sit around and have a good time watching one, especially if it's a group that's never seen it and everybody can be guessing who it is. You can recommend it to a horror fan who's maybe just never seen it. So yeah, I'm gonna sit solidly at 4. If Andy Chacon here gives it 4 1/4. If we did quarters, I would bump it up to that 2.5, just as kind of like an RIP to TJ, the actor who Paul Kellerman did just pass away. I believe just last week. It was like last week or the week before. Paul Kellerman just passed away. But yeah, so I'm gonna let it sit solidly at 4.
Well, it's actually going to get a total of 4 1/4 human heart-filled candy boxes, chocolate boxes, because I'm going to give it 4.5. And for the same exact reasons that you are. I don't think that knocking off a whole human heart-filled chocolate box is fair for just 1 point, even though it's a big point of contention. However, I think so much about this movie works. And when I first saw this, I had no idea that there was a director's cut. In fact, I don't think the director's cut was available unless it was like screened somewhere. So for me, the movie was the edited, watered down version that we have. And I was more than okay with that. I thought that it was spectacular. It is definitely on my mountain of, if we're going Mount Geekmore, right? It's on my mountain of slasher movies, right up there with the Prowler, So I think that there's something really special about this movie. And if we were talking about the director's cut, maybe this might be different. This might be a 5. It might be perfect otherwise. And that's why I think I'm not going to go a whole human heart-filled chocolate box off, because if so much else about this movie, if literally everything else about this movie works for me, I don't know that knocking off a whole human heart-filled chocolate box would
Fair
be
enough.
it. So there you go.
Way to shoot the median, Andy.
Yeah, look at that. Hey, let me know who you think is going to win the Super Bowl, so I can put some money down.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me know what the over/under is. So there you go. 4 1/4 human heart-filled chocolate boxes for the original 1981 My Bloody Valentine. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
As February continues, we are going to continue our month of love, but we're going to take a step back from romance next week. Next week, we're going to explore a paternal love. But it's more the love of a daughter for her father. I just don't know the word for that. But we're going to explore the idea of loving a family member so much that you would do anything to talk to them one more time, as we watch the film. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try it. Veronica.
Yeah. There you go. Nice.
6 years of high school Spanish. boys.
Monday, you said my name correctly, mine and my sister. You said it perfectly. So
hey, there we go. So it's a Netflix one. If you're watching now and you want to get a chance, this one popped up on our radar because I ran across an article that said back when this was released in 2016 or 2017, Netflix released a graphic that said only 17% of people who started it finished it. And so of course they immediately attributed that to it being so scary, but let's also face it, a lot of people just turn stuff on and go to sleep or have sex. So, but it is supposed to be very scary. It's going to fit into our month of love. So next week, tune in Wednesday at 9-8 Central. We're going to be doing Veronica.
And I believe our friend here, Andy Chacon, will be joining us. Barring any sort of weird circumstances. So that'll be exciting to have Andy back on the show. And he just gave us the thumbs up. So that's fantastic. So it's always good to have our friends on here. Speaking of our friends, we've got lots of friends on other podcasts in the Geek Bro Network, as we are one of the Geek Bro podcasts. Make sure you catch Mount Geekmore with Daniel and myself live on Mondays. Not sure when the episodes drop, but I just kind of get the notification on my phone, as you can. If you subscribe. Make sure you follow What's Up Bro, the other half of where our namesake comes from. We've got Comedy Fitness, we've got Better Let Me Tell You, we've got Seasons, a TV podcast, we've got Kick Flicks, we've got Crimacopia, and a Dose of Ellie. And I think that might be all of them.
I do believe you nailed them all. So make sure you check out all those. If you head to geekbro.net, you can find all of those podcasts in one place. If you're looking for us specifically, we are at ShiverPod on all of your social medias. We've been doing better about releasing what the movie, reminding everybody what the movie is going to be on Monday or Tuesday. So you've got a day to watch it, really soak it in, and join us as we talk about it. And we've kind of planned out through March already. So we've got a good idea here. At beginning of March, I'll drop the calendar for that like we did for February. So make sure you follow us at ShiverPod on all that. And also don't forget, if you listen to us, whatever you listen to us on, if there's a rating system, please drop us that 4 or 5 star rating. Let us know what you think. It's going to move us up in that algorithm. We'd love to have more people listening.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here on Shiver, a horror movie podcast, fright you very much.